of papers. The next document.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, with your leave, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the following paper: Fiscal Strategy Statement. They have disrupted supply chains, created uncertainty, and exacerbated shortages of key essential commodities, causing a sharp rise in the prices of food, fuel, fertilizer to unprecedented levels. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the lingering impact of the crisis has precipitated a sharp and synchronized slowdown in global economic activities, to the extent that the October edition of the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook projected global growth to slow down from 6% in 2021 to 3.2% in 2022, and further down to 2.7% in 2023. This is true for the three largest economies: the United States of America, Europe, and China, where growth is forecasted to continue to slow down. In sub-Saharan Africa, growth is projected to fall from 4.7% in 2021 to 3.6% in 2022 and 3.7% in 2023. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in addition to a slowdown of global growth, global inflation is projected to rise from 4.7% in 2021 to 8.8% in 2022, before declining to 6.5% in 2023. In emerging and developing economies, the continuous depreciation of local currencies against the US dollar, coupled with the supply side bottlenecks, will also weigh on the inflation outlook. Driven by the recent action by OPEC plus countries to cut production, global oil prices are projected to average around $104 per barrel in 2022 and remain elevated till the first half of 2023. Conversely, iron ore prices are projected to continue their slowdown but discernible decline due to the slowdown of the Chinese economy, as well as increased supply from Australia and Brazil. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the outcome of all of this development has been the erosion of the incomes of our citizens and the worsening of our food security situation, which together pose significant risks to living standards, as well as the emergence of social tensions. These multiple and reinforcing crises are disproportionately impacting the poor and the vulnerable segments of our society who make up the bulk of our population. These vulnerable groups have to be protected. Building on our past and ongoing efforts to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the economy and the population at large, this budget will prioritize programs and policies that enhance economic resilience and protect the livelihoods of the most vulnerable in our society. Hence, the theme for this 2023 budget is addressing the needs of the vulnerable in the context of the multiple crises. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, before I present the policy priorities and the budget for the 2023 financial year to this noble House for consideration and approval, please allow me to give you a quick update on the measures taken by government so far to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the population. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to avoid the shortage of essential commodities and stabilize prices, government has maintained zero import duty and GST on imported rice. Government deferred taxes on the importation of essential commodities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Government reduced taxes on certain essential commodities. For example, import duty on cement was reduced from 20% to 10%, and iron rods from 10% to 5%. Government established several facilities through the Bank of Sierra Leone, including a special credit facility with 2 tranches of $50 million each during the COVID-19 to support the importation of essential commodities. Another food facility of $50 million during the ongoing Ukraine crisis to support the importation of rice, flour, and sugar, and a $10 million agricultural credit facility to facilitate the importation of agricultural inputs, and $36 million reserve fuel facility for the importation of fuel. From January to October 2022, the Bank of Sierra Leone has provided $115 million to oil marketing companies through commercial banks for the importation of fuel. Cumulatively, a total amount of $261 million has been provided out of the Bank of Sierra Leone reserves to support the importation of essential items. Government provided agricultural inputs, seed rice, fertilizers, and other inputs, and mechanization services to farmers through the e-voucher system for the domestic production of food, especially our staple food, rice. Government has spent 76 million new loans on the e-voucher system in 2022. Government secured $1.8 million from the African Development Bank under the African Emergency Food Production Facility to support farmers with agricultural inputs to boost local food production. Government also continued to provide subsidies on fuel, even at the current level of fuel pump prices. The total subsidies provided amounted to 596 million new loans as at May 2022. Government provided subsidies to EXA amounting to 508.6 million new loans as at September 2022 to support the purchase of fuel for car power and payment for imported power under the CLSD project. And government facilitated the installation of solar mini-grids for 94 communities nationwide, improving national access to electricity from 15% to 35%. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in addition to the foregoing measures, government also implemented several measures targeted at cushioning the impact of the multiple crises on the livelihoods of the people, especially the most vulnerable. Government in this regard provided cash transfers to 2,368 hospitality workers and 29,000 informal sector traders, and provided food support to 11,000 disabled during the height of the COVID-19. Government provided cash transfers to 35,000 extremely poor and vulnerable households under the Social Safety Net project implemented by the National Commission for Social Action, NACSA. Government continued to pay tuition and examination fees and provided teaching and learning materials and core textbooks for government-owned and government-assisted schools. Since 2018, government has spent 4.1 billion new loans on basic education and mobilized more than $140 million for the sector. The outcomes are primary, and secondary levels, increased enrollment, transition, and completion rates. Government mobilized additional financing of $12 million from the World Bank for the free education project to scale up interventions under the free quality school education program, including the school feeding program and hygiene pads for girls. Government established and operationalized the youth employment scheme. They established nationwide ambulance services to support healthcare service delivery, especially in rural areas. Government upgraded 160 community health centers to provide school health services and established 12 boarding school clinics. Government increased the salary of junior and middle level civil servants by 10%, teachers by 30%, staff of tertiary education institutions by 75%, and the security sector by 25% annually for 3 years. Government provided COVID-19 allowances for the security sector and health workers. Government supported micro, small, medium enterprises through the revolving loan fund, which has benefited 6,075 people, of which 77% so far are women. Government commenced the implementation of student loan scheme and provided seed money of 5.7 million euros for the operationalization of the scheme. The scheme has disbursed loans to students studying in Hungary, Russia, and Venezuela. Government also upgraded 2 polytechnics into technical universities and commenced the establishment of the Leone University of Science and Technology. Government mobilized donor funds, mainly grants, to support various projects in agriculture, education, health, and social protection to provide basic services and create job opportunities. Government mobilized and provided funds to continue the implementation of projects in the roads, energy, and water sector, and also planted 1.2 million trees, seedlings, out of a target of 5 million under the National Tree Planting Project to protect the environment and create job opportunities. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I will now provide a review of the macroeconomic and budgetary performance in 2022. Growth has been revised downwards to an estimated 2.8% from an earlier forecast of 5.9%. The sharp increase in global food and fuel prices and the pass-through effects on domestic prices combined with the depreciation of the exchange rate resulted in high inflation during the year. Inflation rose from the low level of 8.9% achieved in March 2021 to 29.1% in September 2022, with food inflation rising to 35%. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, despite the recovery in exports, following the resumption of iron ore mining, higher imports of fuel, food, machinery, and transport equipment resulted in a widening of the trade deficit to $206 million in the second quarter of 2022, from $166.4 million in the first quarter of 2022. The value of exports of goods increased by 12.1% to $298 million in the second quarter of 2022, driven by a surge of iron ore exports. Total imports increased by 16.8% to $504.8 million in the second quarter of 2022 due to higher imports of food, petroleum products, machinery, and transport equipment. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, international reserves of the Bank of Sierra Leone declined from $931.8 million as at end December 2021 to $599.5 million as at end September 2022. This was mainly as a result of measures implemented to support the private sector in the importation of food and fuel products to ensure an uninterrupted supply of these commodities in the market. This, combined with the increase in the trade deficit and appreciating US dollar and speculative behavior by market participants, resulted in sharp depreciation of the exchange rate during the year. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, reflecting the increase in financing needs, the public debt stock reached 40.3 billion new leos, $3 billion US by end June 2022, representing 79.8% of GDP. Of this, external debt is estimated at $1.9 billion US and domestic debt at 14.5 billion new leos, $1.1 billion US. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total domestic revenue collected from January to June 2022 amounted to 3.4 billion, 6.6% of GDP. This indicates a shortfall of 225.6 7 billion, 25.7% of GDP by end of the year. Of this, total recurrent expenditures amounted to 4.9 billion, 9.6% of GDP, exceeding the half-yearly budgeted amount by 251.9 billion new leos. This was due to increase in the general price level and the depreciation of the exchange rate, leading to overruns on goods and services, energy subsidies to EDSA, and interest payments. The wage bill was broadly within the budgeted amount. Recurrent expenditure is estimated to reach 9.6 billion, 18% of GDP by end of the year. Capital expenditure amounted to 1.5 billion during the first half of 2022. Of this, domestic funded capital expenditure amounted to 802.6 million new loans, exceeding the budget amount by 232.8 million new loans. Capital expenditure is estimated to reach 4.2 billion new loans by end of 2022. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the overall budget deficit, including grants, for the first half of 2022 amounted to 2.4 billion new loans, with 4.7% of GDP. Excluding grants, the budget deficit amounted to 3 billion new loans, 6% of GDP. The budget deficit was financed mainly from the domestic banking and non-banking sector, amounting to 1.5 billion new loans. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the medium-term outlook for our economy is also challenging in the wake of overlapping crises. Current projections indicate that growth will not return to the pre-pandemic levels until 2025 and is projected to increase to only 3.1% in 2023. For its part, inflation is projected to decline only gradually to 23.7% in 2023. However, it is projected to drop further to 14.3% by 2025. The current account deficit, including official grants, is projected to narrow from 10.3% of GDP in 2022 to 8% of GDP in 2023. It is expected to shrink further to 5.1% of GDP in 2025 as the trade deficit narrows, combined with an increase in official and private grants. Gross foreign reserves are programmed to average 3.3 months of imports in the medium term. The exchange rate is expected to move in line with the difference between inflation in Sierra Leone and inflation of our major trading partners. However, these projections have downside risks, given an uncertainty in the global economy. These risks include the likelihood of global economy plunging into recession and potential impact on the prices of our key exports. Sustained increases in food and fuel prices and the pass-through effect on domestic prices, trade balances, and government fiscal position. Continued decrease in international and financial assistance the continuation of crisis in Ukraine, and its accompanying uncertainties in the global economy, a re-emergence of COVID-19 and other public health emergencies. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, despite the limited fiscal space engendered by the ongoing crisis, government will continue to implement programs and policies to mitigate the impact on the population, especially the vulnerable groups. Therefore, the 2023 budget will seek to provide support to intensify local food production and facilitate food importation to address food insecurity, especially for the most vulnerable groups. They support sustained critical investment in education and health to improve human capital. They expand social safety nets to enable vulnerable people to cope with the challenging economic situation. We pursue adaptation and mitigation measures in response to climate change risks. We promote private sector development for job creation, contain inflation, and stabilize the exchange rate to lower the cost of living. We strengthen public finances and maintain sustainable debt levels and improve governance and accountability. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I will now describe the policies and interventions in each of these areas in some detail. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the World Food Programme, the WFP, estimates that as of April this year, 1.1 million or 13.4% of the population is facing acute hunger, and 2 million are experiencing chronic hunger. As a net importer of food, the ongoing crisis threatens to worsen the precarious food insecurity situation. Against this backdrop, government's most pressing objectives in the food security area are to meet the immediate food security needs of the most vulnerable and protect against the deterioration of nutrition status of children, boost local production of a diversified food basket, while laying the foundation for medium to long-term investment in boosting agricultural productivity. In 2023, therefore, government will deepen the policy shift in agriculture by continuing to provide seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, and other agricultural inputs, as well as mechanized services to farmers through the e-voucher system to boost food production. Government will continue to roll out the agricultural credit facility to support the importation of agricultural inputs and the food import facility for the importation of essential commodities. We'll provide cash-based in-kind transfers to vulnerable farming households to respond to immediate food needs and support on and off-farm activities to strengthen resilience at household levels. We'll establish strategic grain reserves to enhance government's capacity to respond to current and future food supply shocks. We expand school feeding to sustain gains in education and nutrition outcomes for children and enhance linkages with the Scaling Up Nutrition Program under the Office of the Vice President and the Food and Nutrition Mother Support Group Initiative of the Ministry of Health and Sanitation. We'll invest in improved livestock farming practices to improve the protein content of our food. We'll expand agricultural extension services, including e-extension and other innovative agricultural practices, such as inland valleys, swamp development, and novel irrigation practices. We'll promote integrated aquaculture and support fishermen with appropriate fish the protein content of our food. We'll expand agricultural extension services, including e-extension and other innovative agricultural practices, such as inland valleys, swamp development, and novel irrigation practices. We'll promote integrated aquaculture and support fishermen with appropriate fishing gear and fish retailers with fish preservation tools to ensure sustainable supply of fish in the domestic market, and continue to improve the management of fisheries and marine resources by observing the full fishing season, and sustain efforts in combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the areas of education, health, and social protection services. While we are implementing economic policies to cope with the multiple and overlapping crises, government is still committed to undertaking investments in human capital development that will increase the future productivity of our citizens. These include continuing to support the free quality education program, strengthening technical and higher education, improving primary health care, and expanding social safety nets to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the vulnerable population. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to enhance improvements in basic education service delivery, including learning outcomes for all learners, government will continue to pay school fees and examination fees and providing core textbooks, teaching and learning materials for all children in the government-owned and government-assisted schools. We'll expand the school feeding program to learners in food-insecure chiefdoms, progressively increasing the provision of assistive devices for special needs children and providing school buses. We will restore the homegrown school feeding program through school gardening, continue other targeted investments in education infrastructure by equipping additional schools with science laboratories and libraries, connecting an initial pilot of about 136 schools to the internet through Project Giga. We continue international efforts to support the education of the girl child and the implementation of the radical inclusion policy, and continue to leverage science, technology, and innovation in the education sector, and implement phase 2 of the Education Innovation Challenge program. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to consolidate the significant gains that have been made in higher and technical vocational education and scale up interventions in this sector, government will enhance the implementation of student loan scheme, will complete the development of the National Qualification Framework for TVET, will enhance activities for the establishment of the Kono University of Science and Technology, will establish the following secretariats: centralized admissions, apprenticeship program, internship program, open university and community technical colleges, will establish and operationalize 6 additional TVET institutions around the country, and popularize the implementation of the Education Sector Plan 2022 to 2026. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in strengthening the primary health care, the recent pandemic underscores the need to continue investments in the health sector. Government has been working to reduce maternal and infant mortality, improve adolescent health care, health infrastructure, and governance and welfare of health workers. Building on this, government will expand and strengthen the delivery of maternal, child, and adolescent health services, including the reproductive health and rights of women, sustain disease surveillance and pandemic preparedness and response, support the ongoing construction and rehabilitation of secondary and tertiary hospitals and peripheral health units, launch the construction of the Cancer Diagnostic and Treatment Center, strengthen the National Emergency Ambulance Services, launch the health financing strategy, and continue work for the establishment of the Sierra Leone Health Insurance Scheme. Approve and implement the school health policy and improve the governance and welfare of the health workforce. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in addition to our ongoing interventions in education, health, agriculture, and other sectors, government has been providing social safety nets to the most vulnerable through targeted cash transfers. In this regard, government has secured additional grant financing of $30 million from the World Bank towards the ongoing social safety net project. This additional financing will enable governments to expand the coverage of cash transfers from 30,000 to 100,000 extremely poor households, which make up 14% of the poor. In addition, government has also secured another grant financing from the World Bank under the Productive social safety nets, and youth employment projects. Under this project, government will provide additional cash transfers to 50,000 households. The project also includes an income-generating component that targets 8,000 poor people who are engaged in productive activities, and a labor-intensive public works component supporting 7,000 youths. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is aware that building economic resilience and fostering sustainable green growth requires adequate climate adaptation and mitigation measures. Consequently, building on recent progress in reviewing existing environmental legislations and adopting the new national climate change policy, government will continue to reforest and protect existing forests and restore degraded lands, mangroves, and wetlands to preserve the environment and attract carbon credits. Government will invest in renewable sources of clean energy such as solar, hydro, natural gas for producing electricity. Will deepen efforts for attracting climate finance from international public and private sectors to fulfill our climate commitments. We'll adapt our existing public financial management strategies to integrate climate targets within the budget cycle and mainstream adaptation and prioritize climate projects with a gender-sensitive lens. We'll establish the Climate Finance Unit in the Ministry of Finance to lead on the climate finance mobilization, increase institutional coordination, and build capacity to design funding programs, and finalize the implementation of the crisis and disaster risk strategy developed in collaboration with the World Bank and other stakeholders, including the National Disaster Management Agency, Office of the National Security, and the National Commission for Social Action. The World Bank is also supporting government to undertake climate change diagnostic study for Sierra Leone. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, since mid-2021, our country, like most developing countries, has experienced a sharp depreciation in the exchange rate, leading to accelerated inflationary pressures. This has contributed to the high cost of living and distortion of private investment decision-making. To ameliorate this situation, government will implement appropriate monetary, exchange rate, and debt management policies aimed at stabilizing the exchange rate, containing inflation, and maintaining sustainable debt levels. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of monetary policy, the Bank of Sierra Leone will continue to implement monetary policy based on the monetary target framework, using indirect instruments to achieve its goal of price stability. This is anchored on the monetary policy rate as a key signal of the bank's monetary policy stance. In this regard, the Bank of Sierra Leone will continue to monitor inflationary trends and adjust the monetary policy rate accordingly to contain inflation. The Ministry of Finance will complement the efforts of the Bank of Sierra Leone by implementing prudent fiscal policies. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of exchange rate policy, while continuing to maintain a flexible exchange rate regime, the Bank of Sierra Leone will continue to gear its exchange rate policy towards stabilizing the value of the leone, including intervening in the foreign exchange market to smooth exchange rate volatility, To support this effort, government will provide incentives to export-oriented and import-substituting businesses to generate foreign exchange and stabilize the exchange rate. We lift ban on mining exploration to attract foreign direct investment inflows and generate foreign exchange. We'll harmonize mineral export tax policies with neighboring countries and revisit license fees to minimize smuggling. We'll strengthen the enforcement of the provision in the Finance Act 2021 that stipulates that at least 30% of export proceeds must be repatriated through the banking system and impose penalties for non-compliance. We'll set up effective monitoring system for reviewing import invoices to ensure that forex provided for importation match the value of imports that actually arrive in the country, and permit all donor-funded contracts awarded through international competitive bidding to make direct payments in the currency of the contract. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the high level of debt service payment has been one of the greatest challenges in fiscal management in recent years. Debt service payments, including amortization, accounted for 37% of domestic revenue and 20% of total expenditures as end June 2022. Therefore, ensuring the sustainability of public debt and improving its transparency remains central to government strategy for stabilizing the economy. The build-up in public debt in recent years is attributed to the following: the wider weakening of the macroeconomic fundamentals, including contraction in GDP, drop in domestic revenues, and fall in exports triggered by the twin shocks of Ebola epidemic and the collapse of iron ore prices in 2015, and recently COVID-19 pandemic and Ukraine crisis. The disbursement of emergency support loans by development partners to complement government's resources in mitigating the impact of COVID-19 on population. The loan disbursements by development partners to support the implementation of projects in various sectors, including roads, electricity, agriculture, education, and health, and the inclusion of the verified stock of domestic contractor arrears of 360 million inherited by government in 2018. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to ensure debt sustainability, government will lead domestic borrowing within a sustainable fiscal anchor, continue to seek financing grants or borrow concessional loans to finance investment in key sectors of the economy, especially infrastructure. Continue to introduce local medium to long-term bonds for the financing of infrastructure projects. Continue to explore non-debt creating financing models such as public-private partnerships supported through thorough analysis of potential fiscal risks. Implement updated arrears clearance strategy, annual updates and implement of medium-term debt strategy to guide public debt management, and continue to strengthen debt management and improve debt reporting and transparency through the regular publication of publicly guaranteed debt. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, creating the enabling environment to maximize private sector participation in economic activities is vital for spurring economic growth, creating job opportunities, and building economic resilience. In this regard, government will continue to pursue business-friendly reforms and invest in critical infrastructure. In this context, the Bank of Sierra Leone will pursue the following reforms within the financial sector. We roll out the upgraded Sierra Leone collateral registry system, which enables the registration of immovable and movable assets to facilitate access to credit for SMEs. We'll complete the upgrading of the Credit Reference Bureau to drive financial inclusion. We'll deploy and roll out the national switch to facilitate inter-institution financial transactions and facilitate the enactment of the Deposit Protection Bill to ensure that small depositors' funds are insured against losses arising from market failures. This bill has been laid before this noble House, and we will continue working with the House through the beginning stages of its enactment. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, promoting private sector development also requires improving business regulatory reforms and supporting SME development. In this vein, with support from the World Bank-funded Sierra Leone Economic Diversification Project, government will automate the business registration processes through an integrated online platform linking to Corporate Affairs Commission and Office of the Administrator and Registrar General with other business registration agencies, such as the National Revenue Authority, the National Civil Registration Authority, the National Social Security and Insurance Trust, and the Freetown City Council. Government will promote the expansion of business development services by supporting businesses developing services providers with technical assistance and grants to set up incubation and acceleration centers. Provide training and matching grants to startups and SMEs through incubator and accelerator programs for growth, with an additional focus on women and youth-led businesses. Support entrepreneurship training in tertiary institutions through the development of an entrepreneurship curriculum, training of academic staff, and mentoring and coaching of students with innovative business ideas to help transform these ideas into viable businesses, and strengthening the institutional capacity of the newly established private sector unit in the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government with support from development partners will continue to prioritize spending on infrastructure such as clean energy, water, roads, and ICT to reduce the cost of doing business and bolster economic competitiveness. In the area of energy supply, government with support from development partners will continue to implement projects in the energy sector, including the electrification of district headquarter towns, installation of solar mini-grids in rural communities, rehabilitation and extension of Kenema distribution system, and installation of 40 megawatts containerized solar solutions with battery storage through the World Bank Regional Energy Project. In improving the road network, government with support from donors will complete construction and rehabilitation of key township roads, spot improvement and regraveling of trunk roads, the ongoing construction of trunk roads and roads nationwide, and construction of major culverts and countrywide rehabilitation of bridges. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, with support from the World Bank under SCADEP project, government will construct rural bridges to replace the non-authorized ferries. The construction of 4 of these rural bridges, Tompari in Kaduna District, Manoa in Kailam District, Matru in Bond, Gedema in Kenema District will commence in 2023. In the water sector, government with support from development partners will continue to implement the following water projects. Lunge Water Supply Project in Lunge and its environs. The 6 towns water supply project in Kabala, Kailam, Kambia, Moyamba, Pujam, and Mogoroka. Phase 2 of 3 towns water supply projects in Bo, Kenema, and Makeni. Construction of water supply systems in Bo municipality. Restoring water supply at Aimat and Hill Station. The emergency water supply project in Western area. Construction of 100 solar-powered boreholes and the Beta Wash and Aquatic Revamping Project. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, scaling up and accelerating investment in digital technologies through expanding internet penetration and investing in 5G and artificial intelligence technologies has the propensity to increase productivity in agriculture, increase economic revenues, deepen financial inclusion, create new businesses, and expand overall economic activities. In light of this, government through the World Bank funded Sierra Leone Digital Transformation Project will build the core infrastructure and institutional capacity to strengthen digital public service delivery. Fund the last mile connectivity access for public institutions, improve access to broadband connectivity in urban and peri-urban areas, partner with private sector to deploy shared infrastructure and mobile broadband services to selected rural and remote areas, and bolster cyber security and strengthen safeguards for fighting cyber crimes. Mr. Speaker, honorable members.
Mr. Minister,
Sir.
I don't mean to interrupt, but from the benevolence of the office of Speaker, we have provided you water. Take a seat.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the midst of this reinforcing crisis, there is need to create the fiscal space to support implementation of the programs and policies highlighted earlier for improving the welfare of the most vulnerable. This requires efforts to mobilize domestic revenues and prudently manage and reprioritize expenditures to deliver services for the benefit of all. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, this budget will not introduce any new taxes. Also, all current rates of taxation remain unchanged in 2023. Efforts to raise revenues will focus mainly on strengthening tax compliance and broadening the tax base. In 2023, government will escalate the duty waiver policy approved by Cabinet in March 2022 to a law. Will maintain the implementation of a full pass-through of the petroleum pricing formula. We review the Excise Tax Act 1982 to enable the conversion of excise taxes on alcohol, tobacco, vehicles, sugar-sweetened beverages, plastics, and others to a specific rate to internalize external costs, reduce harmful behavior, and provide a stable source of revenue. We'll broaden the base of goods and service tax as about 60% of its base is exempt, and areas such as digital services and insurance are not subject to GST. Implement the provisions defined in the amended Extractive Industry Revenue Act to maximize revenues from the extractive sector and ensure that government does not get into the legacy of individual contractors containing special and exogenous fiscal terms outside the general tax law, and strengthen the legislative framework around forest protection and related environmental issues to enable the possibility of leveraging climate finance from our forests, including carbon credits, direct plus payments, and grants for forest conservation and reforestation. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, specific tax administration actions will include extending the block registration system to the regional cities to capture more businesses in the National Tax Register, fully rolling out the Integrated Tax Administration System, ITAS, to include management modules such as data management, audit, tax exemption, and taxpayer management. Integrating NRA systems, especially the ITAS, with other information management systems at the Bank of Sierra, the Accountant General Department, the National Civil Registration Authority, and NACIT. We will develop and rolling out a mobile payment app for paying non-tax revenues such as fines, fees, levies, and integrating the app with ITAS and Asikuda for collecting revenue from small and medium taxpayers. Implement a strategy for the operationalization of high net worth individual taxation regime, acquiring and deploying compliance risk management software for customs, and build National Revenue Authority's capacity in data analytics and risk analysis through the use of artificial intelligence technology and training in data analytics and econometrics. Mr. Speaker, Honorable members, government is developing a medium-term revenue strategy with support from IMF and World Bank that will set the pace for policy, legislative, and administrative actions to enhance domestic revenue mobilization in the medium term and put the country's budget on a sustainable path. The paramount objective is to increase domestic revenues to 20% of GDP by 2027. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government will continue to support the implementation of enhanced revenue mobilization and accountability reforms in local councils to minimize their over-reliance on central government grants to deliver devolved services. Therefore, government will develop and roll out revenue mobilization strategies for district councils. Will develop and implement a new fiscal decentralization policy and strategy that will provide additional revenue streams to local councils and boost local revenue collection, and develop a modernized property tax system to reflect current valuation and property rule to increase the tax base for the city and municipal councils. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, deliver services for the benefit of all. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, this budget will not introduce any new taxes. Also, all current rates of taxation remain unchanged in 2023. Efforts to raise revenues will focus mainly on strengthening tax compliance and broadening the tax base. In 2023, government will escalate the duty waiver policy approved by Cabinet in March 2022 to a law. Will maintain the implementation of a full pass-through of the petroleum pricing formula. We review the Excise Tax Act 1982 to enable the conversion of ad valorem excise taxes on alcohol, tobacco, vehicles, sugar-sweetened beverages, plastics, and others to a specific rate to internalize external costs, reduce harmful behavior, and provide a stable source of revenue. Will broaden the base of goods and service tax as about 60% of its base is exempt, and areas such as digital services and insurance are not subject to GST. Implement the provisions defined in the amended Extractive Industry Revenue Act to maximize revenues from the extractive sector and ensure that government does not get into the legacy of individual contractors containing special and exogenous fiscal terms outside the general tax law, and strengthen the legislative framework around forest protection and related environmental issues to enable the possibility of leveraging climate finance from our forests, including carbon credits, direct plus payments, and grants for forest conservation and reforestation. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, specific tax administration actions will include extending the block registration system to the regional cities to capture more businesses in the National Tax Register, fully rolling out the Integrated Tax Administration System, ITAS, to include management modules such as data management, audit, tax exemption, and taxpayer management, integrating NRA systems, especially the ITAS, with other information management systems at the Bank of Sierra Leone, the Accountant General Department, the National Civil Registration Authority, and NACIT. We will develop and rolling out a mobile payment app for paying non-tax revenues such as fines, fees, levies, and integrating the app with ITAS and Nasikuda for collecting revenue from small and medium taxpayers. Implement a strategy for the operationalization of high net worth individual taxation regime, acquiring and deploying compliance risk management software for customs, and build National Revenue Authority's capacity in data analytics and risk analysis through the use of artificial intelligence technology and training in data analytics and econometrics. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is developing a medium-term revenue strategy with support from IMF and World Bank that will set the pace for policy, legislative, and administrative actions to enhance domestic revenue mobilization in the medium term and put the country's budget on a sustainable path. The paramount objective is to increase domestic revenues to 20% of GDP by 2027. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government will continue to support the implementation of enhanced revenue mobilization and accountability reforms in local councils to minimize their over-reliance on central government grants to deliver devolved services. Therefore, government will develop and roll out revenue mobilization strategies for district councils. Will develop and implement a new fiscal decentralization policy and strategy that will provide additional revenue streams to local councils and boost local revenue collection, and develop a modernized property tax system to reflect current valuation and property role to increase the tax base for the city and municipal councils. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in addition to collecting more revenues, there is also need to strengthen public expenditure management to create fiscal space for spending on priority areas mentioned in earlier sections of this statement. This involves improving budget planning and execution for non-salary recurrent expenditures, rationalizing the payroll, and improving the management of domestic capital expenditures. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, adopting the medium-term expenditure framework has improved budget preparation. The transition to the web-based integrated financial management information system, IFMIS, and the strengthening of cash management have also improved budget execution to some extent. However, budget credibility remains a challenge requiring further budget planning and execution reforms. To improve budget preparation, government will adopt the strategic top-down budgeting approach to ensure that the total level of expenditure is determined before detailed items in the budget are negotiated so that it properly reflects aggregate fiscal policy priorities. Government will strengthen the capacity of the Macro-Fiscal Working Group, comprising of the Ministry of Finance, the National Revenue Authority, the Bank of Sierra Leone, and Statistics Sierra Leone, to produce realistic projections of domestic revenue to avoid the appropriation of higher expenditures that could not be funded, and embark on gender-responsive budgeting with a pilot program for the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, the Ministry of Health and Sanitation, the Ministry of Gender and Children Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and the Sierra Leone Police to promote gender equality in budget planning and execution. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, to improve budget execution, government will adopt the use of cash forecasting tool developed by IMF Fiscal Affairs Department to support the regular updating of the cash forecast to inform budget execution. We'll also endeavor to release quarterly budget allocations on time, at least a week before the start of the next quarter, to discourage MDAs from entering into commitments outside the IFMIS, which often leads to arrears accumulation. Ensure that quarterly budget allocations are linked to cash flow forecasts, and budget execution will be based on the principle not in budget, no funding, to discourage requests for extra budgetary expenditures. Base the approval of expenditure commitments on budgetary allocations, and most importantly, the availability of cash, and continue to implement the electronic funds transfer system, which ensures payment requests are sent to the Bank of Sierra Leone only when funds are available, thus eradicating the build-up of unpaid checks with Bank of Sierra Leone. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government's objective in the medium term is to contain a sustainable wage bill level of 6% of GDP. In recent years, pressures on the wage bill resulted from persistent in-year requests for recruitment, promotions, salary adjustment from MDAs. Recruitment and promotions implemented by MDAs without prior concurrence from the Ministry of Finance. Wage demands by various categories of the payroll due to economic climate. Creation of new ministries, departments, and agencies, and foreign missions to support government's development agenda, and rapid exchange rate depreciation, which has impacted on the cost of foreign missions payroll and other categories that receive foreign denominated allowances. Despite these pressures, the transparency and reliability of the payroll has improved, as evidenced in our performance on the wage bill related indicators in the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability PEFA assessment. The focus now is to bring the wage bill to a sustainable level. To this end, building on the ongoing payroll reforms, government will develop a medium-term wage bill management strategy that will introduce additional reforms to strengthen payroll controls and management. We'll continue to pursue the establishment of the Wages and Compensation Commission to address the wage disparities in the government payroll and ensure fairness, equity, and transparency in the determination of public sector wages. The bill for the establishment of the Commission will be laid before this noble House for enactment. Conduct a biometric verification exercise for teachers and health workers to continue ensuring that the right employees in these categories are being paid. We'll institute workforce planning for all payroll categories to improve the controls relating to the new recruitments and salary adjustment, and ensure that from 2023 onwards, the Ministry of Finance does not approve any request for payment of salaries to employees recruited and promoted by MDAs without seeking the prior concurrence from the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, managing domestic capital expenditures is also vital for strengthening public finances. In September 2021, Cabinet adopted the National Public Investment Management Policy, which seeks to address the challenges to effective planning and efficient execution of the public investment program. To ensure that the objectives set out in this policy are achieved, government will ensure that all public investment projects go through the public investment management cycle and activate the governance architecture of the public investment management systems, which requires the screening of projects by Ministerial Investment Committee on the recommendation of the Technical Investment Committee before inclusion into the public investment program. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government's public financial management reforms have been on the foundation of transparency, accountability, and system strengthening for good governance. I'm pleased to report that these reforms are yielding positive outcomes as evidenced by Sierra Leone's improved performance across multiple public financial management assessments, including the World Bank's Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, CPIA, the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability Assessment, PEFA, the Open Budget Survey, and the MCC Scorecard. Building on existing reforms, in 2023, government will take action to strengthen the financial independence of the Audit Service Sierra Leone, accelerate the implementation of Auditor General's recommendation, and improve the performance and governance of state-owned enterprises, including state-owned banks. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, following years of challenge with the implementation of audit recommendations, government approved...
Mr. Bear with us, we've got to follow our procedures.
Mr. Speaker,
Just a moment.
Mr. Speaker, the time is past 12. I therefore move the SO5 to be suspended to continue the business of the House proper. Thank you.
Any seconder to that motion?
Mr. Speaker, I so second, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion, say aye. And those against, say nay. The ayes have it. You may continue your presentation, Mr. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members, following years of challenges with the implementation of audit recommendations, government approved standard operating procedures, SOPs, for the follow-up of audit recommendations. The development of these SOPs on audit follow-ups are a novelty and highlights the importance that government places on audit reports. The primary objective of the SOPs are to determine the status of audit issues and develop executive committees to solve these issues through the audit follow-up mechanism. Confirm the implementation of the executive committees by verifying the remedial actions taken, and analyze and disseminate audit follow-up information to improve the overall governance and accountability environment. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in addition to its operational independence, government is working towards strengthening the financial independence of the Audit Service Sierra Leone, while strengthening compliance by MDAs and SOEs to submit annual financial statements against the stipulated deadlines. Therefore, government, in collaboration with development partners, is amending the Audit Service Sierra Leone Act 2014 to strengthen the operational and financial independence of the Audit Service Sierra Leone. The bill will be submitted to this noble House for enactment. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the context of improving fiscal management, government remains committed to improving the governance of state-owned enterprises, including the 2 state-owned banks, in order to reduce fiscal risks, improve service delivery, and increase profitability. To this end, government has developed the state-owned ownership and governance policy to modernize the governance of state-owned enterprises in line with international best practices. The policy seeks to streamline, clarify, and harmonize the roles and responsibilities of the primary SOE ownership and oversight agencies such as the National Commission for Privatization, the Ministry of Finance, and line ministries. Thus, government will review the NCP Act 2002 and other laws determining the SOE governance framework to remove ambiguities and overlaps with respect to institutional responsibilities for state-owned enterprise ownership and oversight. We'll develop a corporate governance policy for the 2 state-owned banks, improve transparency and disclosure of state-owned enterprise financial and operational performance with full adoption of international financial reporting and auditing standards, and ensure adequate representation of women on all boards of state-owned enterprises. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I will now provide the revenue and expenditure projections and budgetary allocations for 2023 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, on the basis of the revenue measures mentioned above and the projected increase in economic activities, domestic revenue for the financial year 2023 is projected at 9.35 billion new leones, 14% of GDP. Of the total projected domestic revenue, income tax will contribute 3.7 billion new leones. Goods and service tax, GST, 1.8 billion new leones. Customs and excise revenue, 1.7 billion new leones. Mining revenues, 576.8 million new leones. Royalty on fisheries, 179 million new leones. Parastatal dividends, including cargo tracking, 196 million new leones. TSA agencies, 801.5 million new leones. And road user charges, 197.9 million new leones. Grants are projected to amount to 3.8 billion new leones. Of the grants, budget support to be provided by the World Bank will amount to 1.8 billion new leones, and project grants of 2 billion new leones. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, as indicated earlier, the expenditure priorities of government focus on expanding production of food, improving education and health services, investing in infrastructure, and improving the business environment to promote sustainable, inclusive, and greener growth for job creation. The budget will also fund the 2023 general elections. Hence, the composition and allocation of government expenditure for the 2023 financial year reflects these priority areas. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total expenditure and net lending for 2023 is projected at 15.1 billion new loans, 22.7% of GDP, compared to 13.7 billion, 25.7% of GDP for 2022. Of this, recurrent expenditure will amount to 10.9 billion, 16.4% of GDP. Capital expenditure will amount to 4.2 billion new loans, 6.3% of GDP, of which domestic finance capital expenditures will amount to 1.2 billion new loans. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the government wage bill for 2023 is projected at 4.8 billion new loans, 7.2% of GDP, compared to 4.3 billion new loans, 8.1% of GDP in 2022. The increase in the nominal wage bill provides for the following: government's commitment to a 45% increase in salaries for teachers for the next 3 years, starting with an annual increase of 15% in January 2023. The final 25% increase in salaries for the security sector as pronounced in 2021 budget speech, implying that the security sector would have received a 75% increase from 2021 to 2023. Recruitment of 2,000 police officers as follows: 1,000 effective January 2023 and another 1,000 effective March 2023. The recruitment of 500 health workers, which is part of the delayed recruitment for financial year 2022 quota. Recruitment for the newly created subvented agencies, the Land Commission, National Cyber Security Coordinating Center, Consumer Protection Commission, Wages and Compensation Commission, and one foreign mission, UNESCO Dex Paris, and payment of gratuities for the leadership of members of parliament, ministers, deputy ministers, and foreign diplomats in March 23. Mr. Speaker, honorable members.
Point of order. Point of order, sir. Mr. Speaker, we need your attention. You know, we did not hear, Mr. Speaker, we did not hear that paragraph properly. We had. So go ahead. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, government will pay gratuities for the leadership and members of parliament, ministers, deputy ministers, and foreign diplomats in March 2023. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, total interest payments are projected at 2.5 billion, 3.7% of GDP for 2023. Of this, interest payments on domestic debt will amount to 2.2 billion and 220.9 million new loans on foreign debt. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the budgetary allocation to MDAs reflect the priorities of government for 2023. Please allow me to provide the specific details under each subheading as follows. Mr. Speaker, education. Government is allocating 2.1 billion new loans to the education sector, accounting for 22% of the total discretionary budget to support basic, secondary, higher and TVET education. This amount includes 887.7 million as salaries for teachers and 347.3 million new loans as salaries for employees of tertiary education institutions. From the recurrent budget, An amount of 137.6 million euros is allocated to the Ministry of Technical and Higher Education, and 34.9 million euros to the Ministry of Basic and Senior Secondary Education. The Teaching Service Commission is allocated an amount of 3.5 million euros, and the Tertiary Education Commission 6 million euros. Transfers to local councils for developed education services will amount to 17.1 million euros. The allocation includes 476.7 million euros from the domestic capital budget to the free quality school education program for the provision of teaching and learning materials, payment of school fee subsidies, support to the school feeding program, payment of WASC exam fees, diet for boarding schools, welfare and hygiene packages for school-going girls, and rehabilitation of boarding home facilities. In addition, from the domestic capital budget, 32.3 million is transfers to local councils for the NPSC and Becker examination fees. An amount of 42.2 million is also allocated to the Ministry of Technical and Higher Education, of which 30 million is for the clearance of granting aid arrears to tertiary education institutions. Development partners will disburse 534.6 million euros to support the implementation of various basic and secondary education projects. The sum of 526.3 million euros will be provided by partners for the implementation of projects in the higher and technical education. Health. Government is allocating a total of 938.7 million to the health sector, accounting for 10% of the total discretionary expenditure, of which 759.4 million is allocated to the Ministry of Health and Sanitation. The allocation includes 618.5 million euros as salaries for health workers. The National Medical Supply Agency is allocated the sum of 72.6 million euros for the procurement of free health care drugs and other essential drugs and medical supplies. The Health Service Commission is allocated 8 million euros, of which 4 million euros is for salaries. Transfers to local council for developed health services will amount to 65.2 million euros. The sum of 88.6 million euros is allocated from the domestic capital budget to the Ministry of Health and Sanitation to support the construction of the Cancer Diagnostic and Treatment Center, the rehabilitation and equipping of district hospitals, and strengthening of the National Emergency Ambulance Services. Development partners, including the World Bank, Global Fund, Islamic Development Bank, and Kuwaiti Fund, will provide 388.4 million euros to implement various projects in the health sector. Social protection. Total allocation to the National Commission for Social Action will amount to 37.1 million euros, of which 18 million euros is for salaries. In addition, development partners, including the World Bank and Kuwaiti Fund, will disburse 210 million will amount to 37.1 million euros, of which 18 million euros is for salaries. In addition, development partners, including the World Bank and Kuwaiti Fund, will disburse 210 million euros to support the provision of social safety nets and rehabilitation and construction of community facilities. The sum of 16 million euros is allocated as government's counterpart contribution to the implementation of donor-funded social protection programs. Government is also implementing various social protection programs in other MDAs, including the Ministries of Basic and Senior Secondary Education, Gender and Children Affairs, Health and Sanitation, Social Welfare, and Youth Affairs. The Ministry of Social Welfare is allocated 28.5 million euros, of which 11 million euros is for staff salaries and 17.5 million euros for the delivery of social welfare services. Transfers to local councils for social welfare services will amount to 2.1 million new loans. Economic diversification in the area of agriculture. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is allocating 252.5 million euros to the agriculture sector. Of this amount, 18.7 million is for salaries of the staff of the Ministry of Agriculture. From the recurrent budget, government is allocating 39.2 million to support agricultural productivity and livestock development, and 21.8 million new loans for agricultural research. Transfers to local councils for the sector will amount to 11.9 million new loans. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the allocation also includes the amount of 82.2 million new loans from the domestic capital budget, of which 55 million new loans is for e-voucher system to provide seeds, fertilizer, and other inputs to farmers. Our development partners, including the World Bank, IFAD, AFDB, IDB, will disburse 335 million new loans in support of various projects in the agricultural sector. The World Bank is providing a grant of 50 million new loans, 50 million US dollars from the crisis response wing to support food security interventions. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of fisheries and marine resources, government is allocating 30.7 million to the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Resources, of which 2.8 million is salaries for the staff and 17.9 million new loans to support artisanal fishing and promotion of fish exports. The allocation also includes an amount of 10 million from the domestic capital budget, of which 5 million is support to artisanal fisheries and 5 million new loans is to enhance monitoring control and surveillance systems. Our development partners will disburse 55 million new loans for the construction of the fish harbour. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of tourism and culture, a total amount of 22.1 million new loans is allocated to the tourism sector, of which 10 million is for staff salaries and 5.4 million as support towards National Tourist Board. 3 million new loans to the Monuments and Relics Commission, 1.7 million to the National Railway Museum. From the domestic capital budget, the National Tourist Board is allocated 1 million new loans as government's counterpart funding requirement for the Sustainable Tourism Development and Promotion Project. Government will also allocate 1 million to the Monuments and Relics Commission for the preservation and development of Bonds Island. Our development partners, including the World Bank and UNDP, will disburse 12.2 million new loans towards the Sustainable Tourism Development and Promotion Project. The U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation will provide 4.2 million new loans to the Monuments and Relics Commission for the preservation and development of Bonds Island. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of trade and industry, government is allocating a total amount of 58.6 million new loans to the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Of this amount, 26.1 million new loans is for staff salaries. This allocation also includes 14.4 million new loans from the recurrent budget to support the activities of the Sierra Leone Standards Bureau, Sierra Leone Produce Marketing Board, and the Department of Cooperatives. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of roads, government is allocating 79 million new loans from the domestic capital budget to the Sierra Leone Roads Authority for spot improvement and regraveling on trunk roads, completion of township roads, construction of major culverts, and rehabilitation of critical bridges in Freetown, as well as the ongoing construction and completion of major trunk roads, including the Bandajuma Pujeong Bondapi Road, the Kenema Zimi Road, Pendebu Kailan Road, Hillside Bypass Road, Lumley Toke Road, Bo Tikoko Road, Tagri Lunge Konakridi Road, Ketema Matru John Road. Development partners including the European Union, OFID, Kuwait Fund, Badia, and the Saudi Fund will disburse 162.3 million new loans for the ongoing reconstruction of the Bandajuma-Pujon Road, Bandajuma-MRU Bridge, Moyamba Junction to Moyamba, and the three bridges, Magbele, Mabang, and Bambama, and the completion of Tokelomri Road. The Road Maintenance Fund Administration is allocated an amount of 197.9 million euros from the recurrent budget, of which 59.4 million new loans is to cover administrative and personnel costs, and 138.6 million new loans for road maintenance activities. The Ministry of Works and Public Assets is also allocated 15.8 million new loans in the recurrent budget, of which 4.3 million new loans is for salaries. The sum of 151.7 million new loans is allocated to the Ministry of Transport, of which 68 million is for strengthening of governance, and 45 million is for procurement of vehicles for government functionaries. In the area of energy sector, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is allocating 336 million new loans from the recurrent budget to the Ministry of Energy as subsidies to ETSA to cover the cost of electricity generated by car power and evacuated from the CLSG line. Government is also providing 74.6 million new loans from the domestic capital budget, of which 45.6 million new loans is for the electrification of 7 district towns and 24 million new loans as counterpart funding to the rural electrification project for communities along the CLSG line. Development partners including the African Development Bank, World Bank, Indian Exim Bank, and OFID will disburse 456.6 million new loans for the implementation of donor-funded projects in the energy sector. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, in the area of water, government is allocating the amount of 26 million new loans from the domestic capital budget to the Ministry of Water Resources for the Lungi Water Supply Project. The Sierra Leone Water Company, Salwako, is allocated 59.5 million new loans, of which 40 million new loans is for the completion of the construction of water supply facilities in 6 districts. 5 million new loans for the ongoing construction of water supply systems in Bond. 6 million new loans for the construction of 45 industrial boreholes, and the rest as counterpart funding for donor-funded water supply projects, which includes the construction of 100 solar-powered boreholes, 6 towns water supply projects, and phase 2 of the 3 towns water supply project. Guma Valley Water Company is allocated 11.5 million new loans for emergency water supply project in the western area and restoring water supply to the IMAT and hill station communities. Development partners will disburse the amount of 210.9 million new loans and 79.4 million new loans for the implementation of various donor-funded projects implemented by Guma and Salwako respectively. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the allocation also includes 3.5 million from domestic capital budget to support the implementation of various projects in the ICT sector, including the operationalization and expansion of the e-government platform and support community radio stations. The World Bank has approved $50 million digital transformation project to support various activities in the ICT sectors. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government remains committed to good governance and accountability as a fundamental pillar of our democracy. As a result, government is allocating from the recurrent budget 349.5 million new leons to the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone for the conduct of 2023 elections, 156 million new leons to the Ministry of Defense, of which 6 million is for elections-related activities, 166 million new leons to the Sierra Leone Police, of which 38.9 million is for elections activities, 15 million to the Office of the National Security, of which 7 million is for election-related activities, 13 million to the Central Intelligence Security Unit, of which 3 million is for election-related activities, 8.5 million to the Political Party Registration Commission, of which 6 million is for elections-related activities, 2.5 million to the National Council for Civic Education and Development, of which 1 million is for elections-related activities, 3.4 million to the National Commission for Democracy, of which 2 million is for elections-related activities, 18 million new leons to the Judiciary, of which 4 million is for elections-related activities, 18.4 million new leons to the Sierra Leone Correctional Services, and 5.2 million new leons to the National Civil Registration Authority. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is also allocating 13.7 million new leons to the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, 119.5 million new leons to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, 118.1 million new leons to the Ministry of Finance, 38 million new leons to the Parliament, 12.5 million new leons to the Audit Service Sierra Leone, 10 million new leons to the Anti-Corruption Commission, and 27.5 million to the Law Officers Department. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, government is allocating 3.3 million to the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, 2.1 million to the National Children's Commission, 2.8 million euros to the National Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and 2.6 million for the bulk functions under Children's Affairs. From the domestic capital budget, government is allocating an amount of 1 million new leons for the Women's Empowerment Fund. In an effort to promote youth employment and sports, government is providing from the recurrent budget 4 million new leons to the Ministry of Sports and 33.2 million new leons to the National Sports Authority, 6.2 million new leons to the Ministry of Youth Affairs, 3.3 million new leons to the National Youth Commission, 3 million new leons to the National Youth Service, 9.6 million new leons to the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, 3.2 million new leons for devolved function under Youth and Sports Services. From the domestic capital budget, government is allocating 3 million new leons to the Ministry of Youth Affairs, of which 1 million new leons is support to youth in fisheries, 2 million new leons is support for youth in car wash. In addition, 1.5 million new leons is allocated to the National Youth Commission for the Youth Entrepreneurship and Employment Project, and another 1.5 million new leons to the National Youth Service for the Graduate Service Program. In addition, government has secured a grant of $40 million from the World Bank under the Productive Social Safety Nets and Youth Employment Project to support youth employment activities. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, recent natural disasters have highlighted the need for climate risk adaptation and mitigation measures. In support of these, government is allocating 4.2 million euros to the Ministry of Environment, 39.2 million euros to the Sierra Leone Environmental Protection Agency, 4.5 million euros to the Nuclear Safety and Radiation Protection Authority, 2 million euros to the Sierra Leone Meteorological Agency, and 15 million euros to the National Disaster Management Agency. government is also allocating from the domestic capital budget 12 million euros to the Ministry of Environment for the National Tree Planting Project. The overall budget deficit, including grants, is projected at 1.96 billion euros, 2.9% of GDP. The deficit, excluding grants, is projected at 5.8 billion euros, 8.6% of GDP. Government will finance the deficit mainly from domestic sources. Domestic financing will amount to 1.7 billion euros, of which total net bank financing will be 1.4 billion euros, while non-bank financing will amount to 305 billion euros. The additional SDR resources of 886 million euros from the IMF will contribute towards the financing of the deficit. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the possible risks to the 2023 budget, which will derail budget implementation, will include the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the accompanying worsening times of trade, which will adversely affect budget implementation. The potential decline in export prices, especially minerals, iron ore, diamonds, rutile, and bauxite, and rising import prices such as food and fuel will result in a deterioration in our terms of trade. This will continue to put more pressure on the exchange rate and further increase inflationary pressures, and in turn will increase government expenditures above budgeted levels. The global energy crisis and its impact on the budget, the continued uncertainty in the global economy and its impact on development assistance due to disbursement from development partners could result in the scaling down or non-completion of projects highlighted in this budget. The resurgence of COVID-19 and its negative repercussions on the budget, the weak financial performance and contingent activities of state-owned enterprises, which pose a significant risk to the budget, and in the face of increasing incidents, the natural disasters, occurrence of disasters in 2023 could result in the diversion of funding to address emergency with adverse implications for the budget. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, these measures I have announced in this statement reaffirm our commitment to improving the lives of our people during these difficult times. In concluding, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, it is my pleasure to thank His Excellency the President, Dr. Julius Maada Bio, for continuing to demonstrate leadership in planning and implementing development programs for improving the welfare of people at economic management team and cabinet meetings. I would like to thank and appreciate the Honorable Vice President Dr. Mohamed Jude Jallow, who usually launches the annual budget preparation process. His ideas shared during the budget policy hearings have always been useful in the development of the budget framework. The Chief Minister and other cabinet colleagues deserve commendation for their usual collaboration and support in preparing the budget. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to the two Deputy Ministers of Finance for their support in fiscal and economic management, especially during this challenging economic situation. I would also like to thank the Financial Secretary, the Principal Deputy Financial Secretary, the Chief Economist, the Director of Budget, and all directors of the staff of the Ministry of Finance for their support in formulating and implementing economic and fiscal policies and programs, including this policy statement. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I specifically want to thank the Minister, the Development Secretary, and the staff of the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development for their contribution in preparing and rationalizing the capital budget. The contribution of the leadership and teams of all other entities cannot be overemphasized. I also want to thank the Governor, the Deputy Governors, management and staff of the Bank of Sierra Leone for their continued collaboration and coordination in managing the economy. The Commissioner General, management and staff of the National Revenue Authority deserves special commendation for their continued efforts in the mobilization of domestic revenue amidst the overlapping crisis. I also wish to acknowledge the role played by the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, the Solicitor General and staff of the Law Officers Department for the facilitation and finalization of various bills and statutory instruments required for the effective management of public financial resources. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would like to commend the House of Parliament, including your good self, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would like to commend the House of Parliament, including your good self, the clerk and his staff, for the usual bipartisan collaboration in considering, approving and ratifying bills relating to the public financial management matters. I'm confident that this budget will be accorded similar treatment. My appreciation goes to the non-state actors, including the Budget Advocacy Network Band, District Budget Oversight Committees, civil society organizations, and members of the electronic and print media who participated in our bilateral budget discussions and regularly monitor, engage with, and report on activities of the Ministry of Finance. You have been a valuable partner in strengthening public financial management. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would also like to express my profound gratitude and appreciation to our development partners, especially the IMF, World Bank, EU, African Development Bank, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government, ECOWAS Bank, Investment and Development, the Islamic Development Bank, Badia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, United States of America, Japan, China, India, Ireland, Canada, and the UN family for their unflinching support, even though they are also facing budget constraints in the midst of the multiple crises. I also wish to acknowledge the role of international and local NGOs, including Catholic Relief Service, the World Vision, WFP, Oxfam, Care International, Plan International, MSF, ACF, Partners in Health, and USAID in complementing the development activities of government in key sectors. Government will continue to coordinate and oversee these complementary development activities of NGOs, especially at local levels. The government printer and staff rose to the equation and printed the budget statement and estimates in a timely manner. This is very critical for the next stage of the process. Your usual untiring efforts are appreciated. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the policies and measures I have announced in this budget are a continuum of government intervention to mitigate the adverse impact of the global crisis, beginning with the onset of the COVID-19 on the wider population. Had it not been for these interventions, the impact of shocks to food, fuel, on the people would have been worsened than we are currently experiencing. These crises negatively impact on our production, exports, resulting in worsening trade imbalances and depreciating exchange rates. Despite the projected unfavorable global outlook, government will ensure the continued availability of essential commodities, including fuel, while steaming up the type of our most vulnerable population and laying the foundation for sustainable, inclusive, and green growth. I therefore commend this budget to the House. You see. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I move that the bill entitled the Appropriation Act 2023 be read the first time.
I'm sure the entire House would like to join me once more to thank and congratulate the Minister of Finance for the presentation he has just made to the House. Honorable members, the question is, I have enough water. The question is that the bill entitled the Appropriation Act 2023 be read the first time. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it.
The bill entitled the Appropriation Act 2023 has been read the first time.
Once again, Mr. Minister, thank you, and you may now take your seat allocated to you next to the leader of government business. Honorable members, let me now give you a snapshot of the procedure we're going to follow. We shall take an adjournment of Parliament today to the 16th of November. And next week, we shall take up as many of the outstanding bills as are waiting and deserving of the attention of this House. The debate on the budget that has just been presented will start on the 21st of November. And the full time as prescribed in the standing orders, 5 allotted days, will be granted to enable each and every one of you to make your contribution. However, there will be a time limit, and I'm sure you'll all appreciate why. If I have to accommodate as many of you as time permits, then we've got to allocate the time judiciously so that one set does not dominate the debate while the others, are unable to make their contribution. And remember, we're in the run-up to elections. And I'm sure all of you want to be heard by your constituents. I'm sure there is not a single member here who will not want his constituents to hear him say something at this material time. So that is the plan. So prepare yourselves accordingly. I don't know whether anybody has any personal issue to raise. Yes.
I stand on SO23, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, and if actually that one is allowed, this will help this country, and so that the drugs will not be wasted over there.
Thank you very much. Leader of government business, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Speaker, noted today is Friday, And we will do something about it and we engage the chairman, so we do some investigation on that.
And to engage also the Minister of
Health
and Finance.
Finance, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Very good one. Thank you.
With that, honorable members, the House stands adjourned to the 16th of November 2022 at 10 a.m. prompt.